Hello. Today we're interviewing Fatima Kardar from Microsoft. And Fatima is somebody that I've worked with quite extensively while in my time at Microsoft. And I thought, what a perfect person to have on the Tequity Podcast, because Fatima has a wealth of experience. She's been at Microsoft for a million years. She knows all the executives, has worked with all the executives for quite some time, is now an executive herself. We're quite honored, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Fatima.
Thank you so much for having me, though I feel very old now after you say I've been here for millions of years. I started as soon as I was born. I guess that's the way to think about it.
You don't look that old. So you don't look as old as I do. How about that? The way I wanted to get it, since you're so experienced in Microsoft, which is something I want to touch on. But before that, I wanted to get into just you. Like, where did you come from? How did you get at Microsoft? What has been your journey to date, really? Just bring us up to speed on who Fatima is.
So I am, and I think I've shared it with a lot of people in the past. My journey to Microsoft is maybe a little different. I'm originally from Pakistan. I did my undergrad in Pakistan in computer sciences, and I learned about Microsoft opportunity right when I was graduating, and a bunch of my colleagues at LUMS, Lahore University of Management Sciences, which I went, were applying to Microsoft, and Microsoft was flying everybody to Dubai to do interviews. So I got very excited because I thought, great, I would get a trip to Dubai. I had no intention of ever leaving Pakistan or moving to Microsoft. So that's how I got exposed to Microsoft, and that's how I ended up. And what was interesting is I never got the trip to Dubai. Microsoft showed up in Lahore. So my interview was like 3 miles from where I live.
What year was that? What year was that?
That was, I want to say 99 or 2000. 2000, okay. I want to say 2000. And so, yeah, so that's how I got the job. And then for a year, they kept saying, accept the job. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in accepting the job. But finally, they worked on me. And so here I am. So I've been at Microsoft 23 years now. So, yeah. That's when I started when I was a month old. So I'm like 23 at Microsoft. And I've been here doing a whole bunch of stuff. I feel like if people ask me, I'm a platform developer, lower level technical person. But really, I've done a whole bunch of stuff. I've worked on Windows CE, Windows Phone, what we call big Windows or Windows as everybody knows it. I've spent a lot of time in the CTO's office. I've worked in Bing, and now I'm in the gaming organization. So I've had this journey all over the place, ending up here. But really, it was a lucky happenstance that I ended up here. So
now, when I first met you, I can't remember the year, if it was 2017 or 18. I think it was 17. And you had reached out to me with an email to join the office of the CTO. And for everyone, we did not have a CTO before that point. There was no CTO for a while. And then we acquired LinkedIn, and this guy, Kevin Scott, became our new CTO. But unless you really were paying attention to that sort of thing, I didn't really know. So when Fatima sent me an email, I thought, what is this? I didn't even know we had a CTO. But I talked to her, and ultimately, I did end up joining the office of the CTO as well. But before that, you were already there, and you told me once the story about how you just hung out with the execs. Could you relate that?
Yeah, and like what I will say is first is I sent you a random email and you were nice enough to reply. You could have also sent it as spam. But yeah, so I feel like for me, one of the things that I think defines me and my journey is that I always go for what I call non-traditional roles. Like you try to box me in, you're a product person, you're an engineer, like I will push back on all of those. But really, I always look for roles that help me do interesting things that sit at the boundaries of, is it engineering, is it marketing, is it product, is it strategy and stuff like that. So that's how I've gravitated towards a whole bunch of this stuff. And so when I was working in the Windows organization, I used to work in the Windows developer platform team. And I was going to business school as well at that point. So I was interested in a whole bunch of things there. That's when I actually started working with the leadership of Windows at that time, just to help them like stitch the story together. Like we build a whole bunch of stuff that we like to build, and then you go and talk to, there's a conference that Microsoft does called the Build Conference, where you go and talk to people and tell, here's what we're doing and here's why we're important and here's what we should do. And this was a very interesting time in Windows history, because before that you would just say I'm Windows and everybody would do what you asked them to do. That's our legacy. And this was around the time where they're like, so what, you're Windows, but here's how you've burnt us in all these ways, here's how something else. So there was really a need to say, what are we telling them? This was past the Windows 8, let's say, incident that we had been through. So this was very much about like, how do we stitch the story together and tell people why they need to do what they need to do. So I got involved at that point with Windows leadership, with Terry Myerson, who was working on that. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then I randomly ran into a leader that I know at that point, Derek Connell, about a build meet. And so we were talking about a bunch of stuff, and then he was my mentor for a while. So after the meeting, he asked me, like, do you understand this build stuff? And I was like, yeah, I've helped the Windows organization for the past couple of years. And he's like, you know what? Satya just asked me to help him with this build thing, and he wants to talk about conversations and agents and bots. So do you want to help me? And I was like, sure. Like, you had me at Satya, but why? So that's actually how I got involved. Like, working with Satya's team directly is really, as Satya was looking, this was, I think, Satya's second build. So like, he was 2 years or a year and a half into his leadership as CEO of Microsoft. And so that's really how my journey started. I got to work with Satya and LT really as a glorified note taker. That's what I did. I took the notes, I very quietly, then I followed up afterwards. Like, again, not the sexiest of roles, but it earned me the right to be in the room.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't care what you're doing in the room. You were in the room.
I was in the room, right? So like that, it worked really well. And so I did that for a 2-3 months, working up to build, and then I just went back to my old job. And then next year, when Kevin started as the CTO of the company, I had Satya's team, like some of his folks, reach out to me and say, oh, we have a new CTO. He's working with Satya on figuring out this new, the vision was the intelligent cloud, intelligent edge, like his worldview. And it would be great if you can come, you'd be great to come help the CTO figure this out. So that's actually how I got connected to Kevin. I showed up, like, he didn't know me. He was nice enough to me and work with that. And through that journey, which was supposed to be a project, he basically told me I should come work for him. And I was like, we'll figure, like, so that's how I showed up. And it was very interesting because he had already kicked off the process with HR and GTA to find people for his org. And I just completely came from the side. So I remember even the HR people were like, who are you? Where did you show up? Like, you're not on my list. Like, how I ended up kind of working for Kevin and then helped bootstrap his entire organization and stayed with him for 6.5 years.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, just to make note right here, where plenty of people maybe hear about opportunities, but it actually takes quite something to pursue them. The fact that some exec says, hey, what do you know about build? A lot of people could have said, I don't know much. I don't want to get into that. And it sounds like you went, I don't know much, but okay, let's tackle it. And the same thing with the CTO. It's like, I don't know. Just like me. I don't know. We had a CTO and you said, okay, let's go do it. I think that's quite an admirable trait of leaders.
Yeah.
Not just Microsoft, but anywhere. But you have it clearly in spades, right?
I think honestly that's one. And two, I think I'll tell you the other thing. When I signed up to say, okay, I'll help you, like the team that I was in and my boss at that time said, you have all these deliverables. You just signed up for, because build is all consuming. If anybody's been part of that, like build circuit. So he's like, how did you sign up for a second job when you have a date? And I was like, don't worry about it. I'll handle it. So the thing where even he was unsure if I would be able to do it. But again, it's an opportunity that is too tempting to resist and too good to resist, right? So you have to take risks and say, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll juggle it.
Yeah. So there's okay. So here you are, first person in the CTO's office. What did you, I don't know, Was there anything new, different about establishing that? Because it's not a product team, right? It's not like you just hire a bunch of engineers and PMs and ship the product. It was like an org to drive the technology of the company. What was that? What was
I
going
think
through your head?
I'll tell you that one. And two, I think the other thing is Kevin is not like any other Microsoft leader.
And he didn't come from Microsoft.
He didn't. Like, that was like, at that point, he was like 2 months into Microsoft. So and very much like the Silicon Valley leader. And that's why I feel that Satya said he's the right person for this job, because he was a Silicon Valley insider and a Microsoft outsider. That was of course, he's deeply technical and deeply knowledgeable and has vision, but that was the difference. And I think that's kind of where I feel that it worked, because really Kevin and I were complemented each other, because his thing was like, I understand all of this. I need somebody to help me figure out Microsoft and navigate. And I'm like, I can do that. And so I think that's the other thing that I find is for leaders to be able to recognize what is the things that I want to do or understand, and how do I find people who complement me to be able to do the rest. And I have to give Kevin a lot of credit for kind of recognizing that and saying, okay, this is, you will handle it. And so I think that's how we did it. And I feel like in hindsight, it might seem like, oh, we showed up day one, we built a team. But if you remember, William, it was just, for the first year, it was like you, me, Louis, and Matt, and then Umesh, right? Like, that's it. That was the entire organization. And so it was like, and that's again what I love about how Kevin approaches this. It's like being deliberate. It's not like you're like, he is the opposite of, oh, I want massive orgs and more headcount.
Right.
I want nobody to report to me.
Right. I want no direct reports.
I want no direct reports. I don't want any of this. I want to go work on the interesting stuff. And so being deliberate and taking the time to understand what the company needs, and then go in. And though I will tell you, if you remember, he came in with this idea, this AI thing is going to be interesting and big, right? Like, I remember like really early on, and he was like, go find the people in this company who are doing AI. And this wasn't Gen AI. This was some traditional ML, but like even that exercise, and we would go in the back halls of Microsoft, and somebody would say, go talk to this dev manager and he might know something about it. Like, we did all of that, but like having that vision and understanding of there is something, and then empowering and saying, let's take some time to really understand. Once we understand what is the role, then we lean in. And I think that's the important thing about the CTO of this company. So Kevin's not the first CTO of the company. We've had other CTOs, but CTO has not been like a consistent job at Microsoft. And I really feel that the CTOs at Microsoft come in at the key pivot points in the company's history. If you go look at it, if you look at the Azure story, if you look, right? So it's those big pivot points where you need somebody like at that level looking abroad and saying, I need to completely change this around. So I do think like this was the thing. This is the moment like that he brought in. So I feel like it might seem in hindsight that it was arbitrary, but it was very purposeful.
Yeah. I remember the earliest conversations I had with Kevin was immediately about AI and even chip development. We were talking about how are we going to compete against Google and their TPU chips, and talking with Amazon, Facebook about what are we going to do? And here we are. Everyone's creating chips now. I do want to point out a couple of things that you said. One is about leadership. And this is very useful to people who, I talk to a lot of people about starting startups and whatnot. And the thing you said about complementary is key, right? You need to have people around you that complement or enhance or fill in where you don't have the skills, right? Like I was just talking to someone yesterday and he's like, I'm going to develop a product. Classic dev. I said, you better find a salesperson to go with you because build it and they will come doesn't work when you're starting out. So I thought that was really a key thing. And again, we're just going to jump in. I think the foresight that Kevin had, and then having you go and find the people that's quite a trick. Especially in a giant company.
Autonomy, that I had the freedom and autonomy to say what kinds of people, what would you need for it. So I feel like there was a lot of that, and I honestly, the way I approach it. Sure, you're doing technical strategy, you need deeply technical people, but really I feel like I had the privilege and luxury of growing that organization from the first person, which tells me that I could set the culture. This is the tone and the
Yeah.
culture this organization should have. And that actually helped me grow an organization. I think at its peak, I had like 150 or 180 people in my organization. But because I got to build that organization, it was a super diverse organization. I think we had over 50% women, and we had strong kind of diversity across racial diversity as well. So like we had a lot of that because we built it from the ground up. Like it was the built into our DNA. It wasn't an afterthought. And I think that made it really interesting. And then two, I think is you are doing like this is the other thing which I remember like, and you were core part of it, is the mission and ethos of our organization is like we are a service based organization. This our success is in the success of everybody else.
Right.
And what does that mean? Like how do you help drive and be part of something where one, you don't own something directly, so you don't have control over it, and two, you don't sit on your high horse and tell people why they're doing all these things wrong. So what is that right balance of being invested and driving things forward without looking for the even the I like people talk about visibility, but there was no visibility. I sat in a lot of meetings, I never said a word, right? Like you put the like the spotlight on the people who are doing the work. So I think that ethos I feel was core to it. And at that point it was like, okay, once you establish the culture, you need a set of PMs, you need like really deeply technical science people, deeply technical hardware people, software people, product people, program people, right? You bring all of those people together, but you are all grounded in that this is what we're here for. And I think this is where I feel like what I learned from complementary skill set. Like I build a team based on not and this is I still fight with recruiters about this, where they're like, this is the role you posted and this is what it has to be the same level and the same. And I'm like, that's not how I build teams. I find people and I'm like, this is a good asset and this is complementary to what I'll do. So I'll bring this person in and then I'll try to find something else, because I feel that's how you build good teams, is you find the right.
That's a great insight, because okay, I wrote a job description, but I'm not hiring robots. Yes. I'm hiring people, and people have different experiences. The JD is just something to attract the people, and then you evaluate them on, are you a good team fit? Are you a good thinker? If I give you one problem, yeah, sure, you'll solve that problem, but can you solve the next 10 after that? Or are you only able to solve that one problem? Right? Yeah. So I think a lot more managers could learn that lesson of, don't just hire to the JD, the job description.
And I think the other thing I'll tell you is like the idea of a technical advisor. Like a technical advisor is such an arbitrary term where people are like, I want to be a technical advisor. What does a technical advisor do? Answer is whatever is needed, right? And it's
whatever is needed.
And that's the thing, like having people who can wear multiple hats. I remember at one time, I don't know what we were doing, and then you were like, okay, I'm going to go figure out this finance and PCN thing. And I was like, why are we doing this? But that's what was needed, right?
And that's certainly true. And I remember having conversations with my technical advisor peers just about the role. It was, it's not exactly what you're used to. Hold on, stick it out. It's worth, you're providing a different service to the company than just being a PM or whatever the heck you are, right?
It's very humbling, actually. Like you think, and I think that's the other part about hiring the team, is the people who are attracted to this role are the ones who feel like, oh, I'm going to get this visibility and I'm really cool and I want to work. And really the people who are most successful are the ones who are most humble, because it's actually really hard to drive this change, and more often than not you will do something and you put a lot of effort and you don't know if this will work out because it's dependent on others.
It's about servitude, right? You ultimately are trying to serve the organization, and you're offering the organization your expertise, your calm, your insights, all that, and your organizational skills, hopefully. So that's all great. I have this is a typical sort of question about it. What would you say was the hardest challenge of doing all that?
I think the hardest challenge was, I think there were a few of them, right? I do think figuring out where you play a role. I think that was, you go to teams and they're like, we should do this. I'm like, why is the office of the CTO involved in it? Why do you need them? And I think to your point earlier, people like, CTO, we have a CTO, like who are you? And kind. So I feel like that to get anything done, you have to first earn credibility with people, right? Like before before you get the permission to tell somebody, here's what we think we should doing, you had clearly been adding value to what they're doing, which means that really you need to start, you might have a point of view, but you actually have to start with their point of view and taking the time to understand what they're doing and where they're going.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was the hardest in the beginning, is just building that trust with a lot of people to make sure that they understand the value we bring, that we understand what they're doing to help that. Because and I feel like when we did that and with the right people, like we were able to unlock a whole bunch of stuff. And there were places it was really tedious because it was really hard for people to see that, and you make some false steps and that kind of makes it harder. So I feel like that was probably one of the hardest things in this role. And I think, and what I'd say is, to be effective in this role, maybe that's the way I should think of it. You could do, I think we could sit and talk all day and you feel like, oh, I met this person and this important person and this important person, so clearly I did it. But if you sit down at the end of the day and say, all of you talking to this person, what did it achieve?
Yeah, what was the impact?
And the impact was really high. I remember having so many questions, I'm sure you did too. So how do you measure my success? How do you measure my impact? Right? And that was a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I want to point out here for people who we've been talking about CTO, right? Chief Technology Officer. Different companies have different opinions about what that is, right? Like in some companies, the CTO is the head of engineering. And they are like, you're going to do what I tell you to do. And it trickles down through the org, typically smaller orgs. But at Microsoft, first of all, Microsoft is big enough and the product groups are strong enough on their own that they could pretty much ignore anyone. Right? So you're not going to walk in and tell anybody what to do. So clearly what you said about influence and being able to have people trust you is so key for the CTO role at Microsoft, right? Because oftentimes the people, whether you're the tech advisors or anyone else in the roles, they don't report to you. It's influence without authority, the ultimate of influence without authority. That's really cool. I have a completely different track. You mentioned that you hired a pretty diverse group. And as long as I've known you, you've been a champion of diversity initiatives. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Where does that come from for you? You're an executive. You've been at Microsoft a long time. You're now a sponsor of a program that I want you to say something about. Where does that sit in your head? Is that like a top, middle, bottom, side? Where is the whole diversity thing? What does that mean to you?
I think this is me, and really this point, like this is very core to who I am. And I feel like it's because I've lived in two different parts of the world, right? Like I have experienced world in a very, I grew up in a Muslim majority developing country in Asia, and then I moved to the west coast of United States, like as advanced as you can get from that standpoint. And so I feel like that is constantly the thing that is in my head. If you see people who sit there, or if since then I've had an opportunity to work with and visit people in Africa, in Asia, like everywhere else as well, is it's you have smart, brilliant people everywhere. What is missing is opportunity, right? So there is nothing that says like the west coast of the United States has the monopoly on the smartest tech people. Actually, they don't. But the fact of it is, if you sit in Silicon Valley and go to Stanford, the chances that you will end up doing a startup that will be wildly successful is like really high, just because you're there, your peers are doing it, you're
opportunity.
In the VC, you'll run into somebody in the cafe, some crazy idea, right? So I feel like that is something that I deeply feel like that is deeply personal to me, is like, how do we make sure this should not happen? Because the happenstance of where you were born being one of the biggest indicators of what you can accomplish in life, like that just doesn't sit well with me, right? So that is at the fundamental core of how I approach this. So for me, it has always been, and always I look at it as, we need to make sure that we have all of these different people that we serve, and you need to be able to have a very diverse team just to even be able to look at those things. If I am not sitting here and thinking about, oh, you're doing this, but this won't work in India or Pakistan, nobody else will, right? So I feel like this is something that has to be really core to who you are at. And if you don't hire a team that thinks about it, nobody else will. So that's where I do it. Like, you need that diversity, you need those perspectives, you need people thinking about it. And at the end of the day, our job is to rig. This is why I'm in this business, is like, because I feel technology has the potential to equalize a lot of the inequity that we have in the world. So that's where I come from, and that's where, when I think of hiring, it's all about the same kind of thing. Like, I have to change the game.
Yeah, for me, growing up as a black guy in America, you would think that the whole diversity game is baked into me, but it actually wasn't. I was a classic tech geek, shy guy my entire life until about and I woke up to not just that I was in a position to help people, but that I had a responsibility to help people. And that's what changed for me. And just at that time, I moved to India, and I lived in India for about 3 years. So I was cracking open, right? India was completely not America. And then when I came back, it just started to grow on me, where it's like, oh, I get it. I'm in a position to help people. And the evolution of my own thoughts in terms of diversity, you said it. You said the diversity of perspectives. And that's where I've landed as well. As, okay, it's not, I've always said, it's not just about DNA diversity, which in America, it always means hire women and minorities, which means black people and brown people. But that's DNA diversity. And I say, it's yes, but that's a stand-in for different perspectives, right? Because I can just as easily go to South America and I want their perspectives too. And I can go to Southeast Asia and I want their perspectives too. It's not about their DNA, it's about their perspectives. And it just so happens that certain perspectives have classically been ignored, oppressed, suppressed, whatever. Let's rise them up.
Yeah, honestly, like, I am a woman from a very patriarchal society in the developing world. I have no business being an exec at Microsoft on the west coast of United States.
And here you are.
And here I am. There are things where I clearly got lucky. There are people who helped, and then they clearly got lucky. But I look at it as my responsibility to make sure that who comes after me has an easier path to this, right? I just feel like that's built into what I have to do.
Yeah, and it's like I said, for me, it developed over time where it's like, the responsibility part, exactly that is, okay, I'm standing on other people's shoulders, and a lot of people helped me get to where I am, whether I saw them or not. And I owe it to them and to the people behind me and I described this very graphically to some people before, is I need to be willing to get down on my hands and knees so that people can stand on my back to get to their next level. That's okay. So diverse
job. You've done an incredible job with it. I keep seeing like how much you were the champion of our development centers in Africa and everywhere else. So I've constantly seen you live up to that of, okay, what more do I have to do to create more inclusion?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. And I think part of it, like I said, is age. I'm 59. I'm about to turn 60 in just a month. And I think part of it is just settling into that next phase of life for me, where it's okay to stop pursuing. I'm not accumulating anymore. You know what I mean? I don't have to worry about that part anymore. Now it's about giving back more. And it's a lot easier to do something like, oh, yes, we're going to go help this set of people over here. Oh, you're not going to be highly rewarded for that. It's like, it doesn't matter. The reward is that this community moves further along, becomes more developed, right?
This is an interesting one because I think there is this idea of legacy, right? all humans, regardless how we think about our legacy. And some people like to make buildings with their names on them, right? That's how they feel like they will be remembered.
Right.
But I do think this is part of it, because like somebody told me a stat the other day was like 3 generations down, your family will not know your name. Do you know your 3 levels up grandparents' name? No, you don't. Like, you know general stuff about them. So really, when you think about what is the mark that you're leaving, I very much feel like I definitely don't want my name on a building. But what I do want is I want to be able to change the course of the lives of people on this planet. And that is the effect that helps to make sure that, and that's the thing, you change one generation and the generation after that changes. And I feel
Right.
honestly, if you change the direction of the generation of like people from all over the world, like that's what you need. Like, you can tweak a little bit for somebody who's already going to Stanford, and no offense to people who go to Stanford, because it's the second time I've said this. But if you go change, like, people are hungry, they want to change, and if you change their lives, it changes a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. That is no more evident than in when we did the LEAP program and we hired various people. And there's just so many examples of, I'm a single mom, my daughter now gets to go to college because I have this job, right? There's just tons of examples. Or like you mentioned, the development centers in Africa. There's whole communities there that are now a next level up on the ladder of being able to achieve stuff that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So that's impactful. That's probably going to last longer than any code I wrote.
Exactly, right? Yes.
In the last 40 years. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about AI, because that's all the buzz of the day. Now, AI, like we said before, it has started in the office of the CTO at Microsoft. Kevin was like, AI is the thing. And we thought it was something else at the time, but now we're all into this generative AI. I just wanted to get your perspective on that. I don't know. Did you have any insights as to it coming? And ultimately, where do you see it going? That's the bottom line, is where's this going?
So I feel like I was privileged to have a front row seat on this stuff, just working for Kevin. And I feel like it's not coincidence that Microsoft is in the position it is in AI right now. Honestly, there's a lot of work that goes over years to get the company to there. And so I feel very privileged to be at the front run, both of the where we had disappointments, where we thought we would do something and we didn't, but also where you have something like that shows up. So I feel like I've very much been in, like, I wasn't an AI practitioner. I'm not like a applied scientist or anything like that. Absolutely not. But I've had a front row seat on just seeing the progression and what's coming and how all of this stuff comes together. So I'm very, very privileged that way, including like the partnership with OpenAI. Like, initially when we did the partnership with the OpenAI, I was like, who is this OpenAI? What are they doing? Here's why we want them again. And I remember when even as late as like GPT 3.5, like the model was out and we'd go tell people in office or somewhere else, we have this model, you should use it. Like, why? We'll do our own thing. And then 4 came over, and then now suddenly this is the person who used to do this role is like the most important role, and everybody wants their time. So I feel like I've seen that transition. It's very humbling, honestly, is to go from there to where you're at the center of this stuff. But really, I remember when like Kevin had started seeing early versions of GPT-4, and he's, this is going to change. Like, you can see like the emergent properties that are starting to come up and what's happening there. And then I remember in the summer of 22, I want to say, is like when this GPT-4 is baked and it's ready. And then I remember Satya setting up a meeting with, like, he picked a bunch of kind of CVPs across the company, and really he's like, we need to now show it to them. So like we picked people from all over the company. They came into, it was an in-person thing, and we had Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, and they walked through GPT-4, and then people tried it, and it was this moment where you see all this technology and interesting thing, and it's very interesting. Like, you see the tech and people are wowed by it, and then people can't believe it, and then you like Satya came in and he's, and now I have a job for all of you. That moment where this is the moment where I feel like, and I feel like I've been like right there with a lot of these moments, right? Like the front row of, this is the moment you will look back on and say, right. And it's amazing when Satya says it, you have like goosebumps all over you, because you're like, yeah, like this is the moment. But
Yeah.
I see all of those kinds of things and where we are at and what need to do. So like I feel really excited about it. And I think for me it's just the potential. I think that's, yes, you can do cool, interesting things, but like you can do a lot of things that only a few people could do in the past that are now accessible to a lot. And that's what excites me. So in the sense, like I'm excited for the tech, but I'm very excited for the promise of the kinds of things it can solve for the kinds of people, right? So I look at it and my biggest thing, and this is what I hope for in the future, is like the democratization of this. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
the technology is, with a few, it's more expensive, it's all of that, but once that train starts, like it will get, it's like the Moore's law. Like first who had the PCs, and then how many more people, and then you had things like the Moore's law, and it gets cheaper and you're able to, you have to get started. And so I feel like we'll get there, but like really now there's so much that can be done by so many people who were not, like who were maybe not, if you're a software, you have a software degree or an engineering degree, you can do this, but like outside that you're on the fringes of it, not really. So that's my potential. And I feel the other thing that and this is, and we'll have to be purposeful about it, is the AI is not, should not be built for a certain set of people or a certain group of people. How do you make sure that the models represent or can be changed or tweaked to people across like the problems that exist all over the world? And that's where
Right.
you see interesting things like, oh, you have foundation models, but does it apply to healthcare? Does it apply to climate? Does it apply to unique challenges that sit in Africa? So all of those things are the things that excite me, and it's all the applicability of that, right, that I feel is going to be most interesting, because I think there might not be a big wow, one massive thing to rule it all, but I think there will be a lot of things that you
Yeah.
think are simple but really were not thought of as simple previously at all, right?
It's very much similar to the birth of the transistor, right? It's, yeah, the transistor, and then eventually that became CPUs and this and that and the other thing, and then it was just everywhere and everything, but there wasn't a single moment
Yeah.
where it was like, oh, the thing arrived, and then
Yes.
suddenly the world changed. No, it was a continuum for the past 40 years. I similarly look at the rise of AI, and the way I tell people is, just 5 years ago, if someone was asking me, young, up and coming, I want to get into tech, I would have said, oh, go learn Objective C or C++, do some web development, blah, blah, blah. It's
If
all
you want
about,
to be a game developer, you still need to know C++, just saying.
yeah, so it's like, it's all this coding stuff. And I still code because it's my hobby. But the first thing I tell people these days is, first of all, go get a ChatGPT account because you need to learn the new tools.
Yes.
And second is, okay, human creativity and innovation is going to become more and more important going forward. There's fewer and fewer people who are going to be writing the lowest level kernels of this and models. And so learn to use the tools. And then just, we're automating intellect. So you need to get ahead of that, right? But there's never been any time in human history where it was cheaper, easier, more approachable to use technology, right? To your
Absolutely.
point, it's like everyone has been given a magic wand. Now let's go use them, right? It's, I even tell my son is what? He's 10, he's about to turn 11. And I say, by the time you're old enough to have a job, you probably won't be doing smashing on a keyboard. You'll probably be talking to a computer, maybe having interactions with robots, stuff like that. It won't look like the programming that I've been doing. A lot more people will be doing just this interaction with technology instead of
Yeah.
programming it. But today, yeah, you need to learn some stuff.
But I think the point that you raised about your kids and like the generational shift, you and I are like, you keep telling yourself old, but I feel old as well. So we are a different generation than the kids, because your kids are like a little older than mine, but around the same kind of age group. And I look at them and their comfort with technology, and I feel like it's a very, like, my kids assume you can touch every screen and
Yeah,
change it, and they get annoyed when I don't, or that you can speak to every speaker and
right,
everything. So I think there are things that like actually aren't that, like when I started at Microsoft, you couldn't touch screens or you couldn't
right.
speak to it was 10 years ago, you could like, but it is so going to be ingrained in the day to day of how this generation operates that they'll just be used to a very different world. And so how they leverage like tech is going to be very interesting, and like the baseline. So to your point, like you have to go try ChatGPT right now, because it's not that, oh, you want to be tech savvy, you just want to survive in this world. This is the
Yeah.
bare minimum. You have to get at that bare minimum, because everybody else will be that plus something else.
Yeah, it's table stakes. I used Copilot in my coding as soon as that came out, before the ChatGPT stuff, and I was blown away. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm an experienced programmer. I've been doing it for 40 years, more than 40 years, and this thing saves me 30%. Oh my gosh, nothing else in my life has ever saved me 30% on my programming, and this does. So it's, okay, that's a thing. So it's all very interesting.
It is. Our dear friend Umesh Madan, who is an amazing developer, like he literally says, you cannot pull this out of my hands. Like I will go hurt somebody if anybody ever tries to take this. And he has been like 30 plus years of as a deep engineer. So like, that's
it's just the tools, man. It's like telling a car mechanic, oh, we're going to take your wrench away. What? Then you're not going to have your car fixed. Let me try to wrap up with a final question.
Go for it.
Maybe it'll be the final question. Just what is your dream for the future? It's as broad as that. Like, not about AI and all the rest, but just how do you see the future?
Given the situation that we are in right now, I was saying earlier this morning, I was really following the updates in the conflict in the Middle East right now. I look at that and I feel in some ways the world has changed, but in a lot of ways we should do better, right? We talk about technology and all that empowers, and even how it changes things like conflicts, right? 100 years ago, wars were very bloody, but nobody knew, because there were no live streaming of camera like things there as well. But I look at that, and so in a way, like we as a humanity, we have grown and achieved a lot, but in some ways we are very primitive, right? Like the violence, the war, the things like that, the not taking enough time to understand the other side's perspective, or like just painting people in broad strokes, or kind of not understanding that. And that's where I feel like that's the part that honestly pains me a lot, especially these days. And I look at that and I'm like, in all of this tech and all of this, where is our humanity? And are we getting to know, that is at the end of the day, when robots have taken over the world and kind of we live in this utopia, like what is going to make a human, right? Like,
right. What is humanity?
What is humanity? And I look at that and I'm like, really, it's that human connection with everybody else. I freak out sometimes when I see of these, these AI bots where you need an AI boyfriend and an AI something else, and it serves a lot of purpose. But at the end of the day, like I want my kids' friends to be humans who care. Right. I want us as humans, we are no longer going to go back 50 years or 100 years. We are in this very deeply connected world. Like when you think of climate change, when you think of it, like when you have floods in Pakistan or famine in other parts of Africa, they are not caused by people in those parts of the world. They are caused by other people. So I look at it and I feel like that having that empathy and understanding for how all of us are connected and what that means, and really seeing people for humans. And I feel we have the technology and the capability to do that. So that's honestly where I feel like I feel that's going to be a big breakthrough, and where we need to go forward, because that's the place. That is too meta, I know, especially like.
No, I think it's right on. I think that, and to just amplify what you're saying, I've told people all the time, this is where true diversity will show its head, because in order to have humanity, you need to listen to your religious people, your philosophers, your sociologists. You need to start listening to all that, and not just us classic tech people, right? I don't define humanity. I just write code. Right? Go talk to a philosopher if you want to know what humanity is about and how friendships are forming. I'm the last person to ask about forming friendships. I write code. So I agree with you 100%. I don't think it's too pie in the skies. No, we're exactly at the point where we have to define what is humanity, because labor is automated, intellect is being automated. What's left? And that's
I
us.
think I'll sorry, I know where, and I'll make one point that I think is very valuable in this is like the AI part of it. Like, what makes AI AI? A lot of times when you see people going like uproar on AI or is this right, is because in our vocabularies we understand humans and we understand machines, but AI sits somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And so because it's clearly not a machine, we start thinking of it as human, and then we get all worked up because it's not human. You read a book,
Yeah.
you imagine there is a writer with his life story that leads to him writing something like that. But if an AI writes it, is it a bad thing? No, it's not. It's just that you have to separate. So I think even in this future world, we have to have a vocabulary about what is human
Yeah.
and what is not, because we will be very quickly in a world where a lot of AI and tech can pretend to be a human really well without all of the things that you expect it to be doing. So
Yeah. It can appear to be human, but it's just an empty shell. Is human about acting or is human about being? Right. Okay. This has been fantastic. It's very rare that we get to talk to people who are so experienced in tech and have such great perspectives. I love your perspectives on so many things. I love the history, and that's also a rarity to get such an insider's look at what goes on. But thank you very much for the conversation. It's been fantastic.
perfect. No, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, William. It was good to catch up.
You're welcome.